good afternoon, good evening, depending on from where you tune in. Warm welcome to our fourth Digital Ocean Cluster Briefing, also on behalf of Patrick O'Keefe, who will be co-moderating this briefing together with me, and Nele Tiedemann, who had a key role in organizing the event. Many thanks for this, Nele. I'm extremely glad to see some new names and some new, but to some extent familiar faces among the participants. That means that our network is growing. I'm equally happy to see some participants joining for the second or third or fourth time, which means that the network is also consolidating. Well, in the long run, the aim is to turn the DOC, the Digital Ocean Cluster Briefing, into a network project with in-person events, workshops, etc. But for the time being, and for quite obvious reasons, we focus on online events, and our main activities so far have been the Digital Ocean Cluster Briefings. For those who are here for the first time, I will briefly explain the format, which is quite simple. The briefing opens with a 15 minutes presentation by our invited guest. Today it's Andy Jones. And after the talk, we will dedicate 15 minutes to a Q&A session to which all attendees are invited to participate. So you're encouraged to ask your questions or to follow up on ideas raised by our speaker in the second half of the briefing. And you can either submit your questions through the chat or just take the floor as you wish, as you prefer. Well, in our first briefing, we were setting the scene by exploring the concept of digitalization of the oceans with Alex Valenti. In our second briefing, we dealt with cyber risk in relation to operational technology on board ships with our invited guest, Julian Clark. And in our last briefing, Anja Blasch introduced blockchain as a tool to also be used within the maritime domain. For those who missed the first three briefings, or some of them, you will find the recordings on our new website. Nele will send you the link through the chat. Well, the title of today's briefing is Transport 4.0, Securing a Digital World. And I would like to express my special thanks to Andy Jones, who accepted to be our today's briefing guest. Andy is a distinguished analyst for the Information Security Forum and is currently responsible for research topics associated with industrial control systems, including the Internet of Things and extreme cyber attacks. He has previously held Chief Information Security Officer position for Maersk Line, Unilever and Sainsbury's supermarkets, as well as information security positions in British Airways. Andy, thanks again for accepting to be our guest. I'm very curious to learn more about the newest developments regarding cybersecurity in the maritime domain. The floor is yours.
Please do shout if you can't see the slides or hear me. I'm assuming you can if no one shouted. So let me kick off because we only got 15 minutes, so that's quite quick. So I want to give you an overview of some of the issues I think that are relevant to, I've called it Transport 4.0. We're focused on maritime here, but I think a lot of the things I'm going to say are going to be equally applicable across other areas of transport. So let's just go into it. So Transport 4.0, what is it? It's digitization of maritime. And there are a couple of drivers that are important. A lot of transport has already digitized. My background is actually aviation, and the aviation industry digitized quite some time ago. And the maritime has been quite slow to do this, but there have been some changes that have been significant. And a couple of these I want to explore. And one is sheer connectivity. So it wasn't that long ago that at deep ocean, there was no chance of getting even a message to a ship. But now, thanks mainly to satellite communications, we can get a fairly reliable internet connection, even at deep sea, for most vessels. And that's a big game changer. And we'll talk more about that as we go through. The other thing I want to introduce is the IoT, and I should say what the IoT is. The IoT is the Internet of Things, and these we recognize in the home as smart devices, but in industry, they're even bigger. And these are little computers that just sit and they gather data for you, and those are transformational for the maritime industry. And we'll look at a couple of examples of those as we go through. We do this for a reason, because there are tangible benefits in actually digitizing. It's often actually managing your company more effectively. That's what it really gives you. But of course, there is also an element of hype that we actually have to take with a little bit of pinch of salt. But all these things are truly transforming the industry. So I wanted to throw some examples in. So I'll talk about merchant freight first. Now, the one that's closest to my heart is reefer tracking, which is the Maersk container management system. It's looking at refrigerated containers. And basically what we did with that is we stuck a GPS unit into a refrigerated container, which was powered. And we originally did that to make the electrical engineer's life on a ship a bit better, because they have to maintain up to 2,000 of these things on a voyage. And it's not a great job. So if you can actually have a screen that tells you which ones are looking like they're getting too warm, you can go and fix those, that's a better job. And that's why we did it. But then we looked at this system, and then we looked at the ship and we said, what's that thing at the top of the mast that looks like a satellite dish? It's a satellite dish. That means we can do clever things with the data. We can get the data from these containers back to our head office. So we can pick up across our fleet near real time a picture of the status of the containers, the humidity, the temperature, and the GPS location. And suddenly that was interesting to customers, because customers would like to know this stuff, and they might like to change the temperature of the container on its 3-week voyage to help the goods be in better condition. So something that we actually put in just to make the electrical engineer's life better through the Internet of Things, which are these GPS devices sitting in each container, suddenly was an interesting proposition. Other examples to share with you. So Mole do quite a simple Internet of Things with some of their ships, and they just basically set up lots of vibration sensors within the ships and just sail them. But they can connect these through the satellite real time back to the head office. They can suddenly pick up interesting data about their fleet and understand how their fleet is performing through the water, and make modifications to the fleet or adjustments to the fleet so they get a smoother transition through the water, just through vibration sensors. But for the freight industry, the biggest cost is bunker oil. And if you can actually put on some IoT devices on your bunker flow meters and transmit that data real time back to the head office for the first time ever can see real time the bunker consumption, their biggest cost, and they can put in interventions. They can call the captain and say, slow down, or speed up, or take a different route. And they can manage a fleet of 600 vessels in ways they can never do before. And this is the transformational thing that the Internet of Things does through digitization. That's why it's important. But my background is merchant freight, but we shouldn't forget there's a whole other industry of cruising. And the implications for the cruising market are even more interesting. You can do interesting things once you've got these data devices capturing data in real time. You can create a software model of your whole ship, because you're monitoring all the electronic components and you're capturing that. So suddenly you've got a software model that you can test in ways that are safe, because it's not at sea. And you can test, how can we be better with our heat recovery? How can we check the extremes of structural performance? Can we monitor the passenger flows around the ships? Can we do predictive maintenance? So you can test it in a safe way. That's what the digitalization enables in the cruising industry. But for me, the really interesting thing is Ocean Medallion. This is from Carnival Cruises. And basically, it's an Internet of Things device that the passenger wears. The passenger chooses to wear, and actually in some cases, they will pay to wear it. It's a brilliant model. And it gives them a certain number of things they can do. They can get into their room, they can pay for things, they can gamble through their device sitting on their wrist. But for the cruise liner, this gives a wealth of real-time data about what your passenger is doing on the ship. And don't forget, there are up to 5,000 passengers there wanting to spend money. So you can take the model that's been very common in the supermarket industry, and my background is supermarkets as well, in terms of data analytics, and get new insights about your passengers, and you can upsell things. You can create loyalty. You can customize the experience for the passengers. So I think in the cruise liner, there's some really interesting opportunities that can make a lot of money. The Internet of Things and digitization creates through these sort of devices. It's an interesting model to look at. But what does this make? This makes the ship, the vessel, a data center on water. It's full of computers, and it always has been. And, you know, obviously the rudder is not turned by a big chain that's connected to the helm. It goes via a series of computers, a series of actuators, and it's a computer making the instructions. And that's all worked pretty well. And we have systems within the ship that operate that way. And they've tended to be quite separate from the IT systems. But when we introduce the Internet of Things, we create a bridge between them because we want to get this data back to the head office. So it has transitioned from the operational technologies, from the rudder, from the propulsion, back to the office through the IT layers and back through the satellite dish. And that is what introduces new risks. And suddenly something that was disconnected is now visible on the internet to all the bad people. And there are lots of interesting things that are open for attack on a ship. Ballast systems, you don't really want to play with those too much. Electronic charts, GPS, we'll talk more about GPS later. Lots of systems that could be attacked. Lots of systems that actually weren't designed to be connected. And that's one of the issues that we need to start worrying about. So let's take some practical issues. So I'm sure you will recognize this is the rudder. And this is the rudder. So the rudder is of a big ship, and it's controlled by an actuator, which is talking to a computer. The computer then talks to the helm computer and looks for inputs. So if you want 10 degrees right rudder, this, what you're seeing there, is actually the instruction that goes to the actuator. And if the actuator sees that instructions, it'll put in 10 degrees right rudder. What it will not do, it will not check to see where the message came from, because it's at sea. It could only have come from the helm. That was true, but now it's a connected vessel. That may no longer be true. So what if somebody who wasn't the helm changed that R to an L? Would you get 10 degrees left rudder? Yes, you would. It would just change. Not designed to check. That's one of the issues we have with the Internet of Things, technology and digitization. It's a very trusting environment. It trusted the command could only have come from the helm of the ship it's on. That's no longer true. And of course, we have a crew. We have maybe 20 to 25 people on a big cargo ship. Most of them aren't actually from the shipping company themselves. They're probably contract crew. And they've come on for 3 months and they're going to get bored. So they've brought on all their devices. And the first thing they want to do is connect up and get back on Facebook to talk to their family. So from the company point of view, you're taking unknown devices onto your ships with unknown people who, not for malicious reasons, but will actually want to inject some risk because they're using devices that you don't know anything about. I think part of that is getting the awareness of the danger to the crew. But the crew can get quite lonely and they can be targeted in terms of creating access to the ship. So need for awareness messages. But what about things like piracy, which is still a bit of an issue? Is there an element of piracy that can be enabled by this connectivity? And we've had some interesting cases of GPS spoofing. The Stena Impero was one of them, where its navigation systems were spoofed. So the GPS thought it was somewhere else. It thought it was in international waters. It wasn't. It was in Iranian waters and got into quite a lot of trouble. Can you spoof GPS for shipping? It's not difficult. And yet it is a key part of the navigation now. So part of that would be to say to the captain, say, well, perhaps there's a time when you want to look out the window. Don't trust your dials all the time. And we know we've got the big fuel issue in the US at the moment, ransomware. Ransomware is a plague upon many companies. What does it look like if you're in a cruise ship and you get hit by ransomware, which takes out all your systems at sea? and somebody's saying, give me $10 million to restore them for you. How does that look like for a shipping line? Some other things to think about. And one of the things we do see is governments. Governments start to get a bit nervous. They see these and they see the importance of shipping. And they say, this is really critical. This is critical infrastructure. And we're now digitizing this and creating new risks. How do we feel about that? Well, they start to get worried about it because it's really, really important to the global economy. 90% of goods go by ship at some stage. It is the global economy. We saw what the sewage blockage caused. It is the global economy. It's really important. And governments get nervous. When government gets nervous, they start to regulate. And we start to see regulation coming out mainly through the IMO, which is good and bad. Because what it does, it sets a big message. It says, governments, regulators, we're worried about this. You ship operators need to take this seriously. And it does get things going. It's not a perfect thing because shipping is messy. Ships are old. There are various flag states. No two ships are identical. They all have different bits in them. It's difficult, but it starts to send a message. So we see these strong messages coming from the regulators, which means they're coming from the governments. They're worried about this sort of critical infrastructure and how it will look. So that's what we're starting to see now. So does it create a perfect storm? There are lots of benefits of digitalization for maritime. So it's important. I think there are risks that we need to recognize, that suddenly a ship is looking like a computer system. And we know computer systems on the ground are vulnerable. We need to take the good practice we have for that and apply it to the ships. It's harder because they're hostile environments. They never stand still. Trying to catch a ship is quite difficult. They move around a lot. But we need to take that seriously because there are ways that you can overcome the defenses that are set out of there. So we just need to take a look at how we do this stuff. And not forgetting the future of shipping may look slightly different. How do autonomous vessels look? How do they actually work? Do they have even more of these sort of issues? And before we rush into that area, we maybe need to know some of the issues that relate to things like autonomous vessels. It's a big area to look at. So hopefully over pretty much 15 minutes, I've just given you a flavor of what digitization means to maritime. And I want to say there are lots of benefits. Managing bunker, brilliant. Managing the containers, brilliant. Managing the cruise passengers, brilliant. We can actually make a lot of money as a company over there. But when we connect that, we connect our industrial control environment through the IT, through the internet, for a thing that was never meant to be connected. And there are risks with it. And we see those risks, we see the response from the regulators. So it's not a sky is falling situation, but it's something that we need to take quite seriously and understand the risks that are proportionate to the rewards that come from digitization. And that's pretty much me in about 15 minutes.
Andy, thank you very much for your interesting and actually very comprehensive summary in only such a short time. Given your background, especially having worked in so many different areas, branches, and so on, I mean, you have seen also many individuals working in these spheres. Mm. And when people from different fields are coming together, say technology and law, they often do not really speak the same language. Do you see, especially in the digitalization of the oceans, also the chance to overcome those thresholds? And it's also important for lawyers to understand technologies and vice versa. And how do you think, from your experience and what you have seen, how do you manage to bring these actors together and to create a productive working environment that is not only being balanced to thrive off these different perspectives? What's your take on this one?
Yeah, I mean, the legal angle for information security is quite large. So my time at the CISO was Unilever and indeed Maersk. I spent a lot of time talking to the legal counsel, to the extent at Unilever that the legal counsel used to refer to me as a cousin because I spent so much time with him. But these are really important issues because law is an interesting topic in itself, and cyber's quite an alien topic, and there needs to be a meeting of minds. And there's a lot of legislation, and the legislation is written in legal terms quite deliberately, but relates to technology. So there's a melding those together. So there's a need to actually bring these two parties together. And it's just create a relationship. Go and meet the legal counsel. At Unilever, we actually appointed a specific digital counsel whose only responsible was for digital systems. That was quite unusual, because usually legal people are jurisdictional or very, very specialist and not in digital things. So I think that was quite an interesting thing. So to create that synergy between those counsels and have those conversations, because they do need to be they're not, especially if you get an attack, and I don't want to talk about cyber attacks specifically, but a big cyber attack, and let's pick not Petra on Maersk, was a big legal event. It was such a big legal event, and many of the things you do in IT have to be done with a legal mindset. And when you're running around in a panic, you're not thinking like that. But if you've got those contacts and you have done the pre-work and you understand some of the concepts we need to be careful with, you can do it. So I think it's underestimated how important legal is, especially for a big multinational.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would also like to take this time and hand over to Hagop, who has posted a question in the chat. Are you up to? Yeah, there you go. You have to.
Yes. Hello, good afternoon. Sorry, my camera is not up to par, but you can hear me well, right?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's just a question. I had several questions, actually. They're all kind of interrelated. But my first question is, like anything else, what about a good due diligence upon A, ship owners, for a variety of reasons, and two, about ship crews, something that you mentioned when they bring on board compromised devices, which can really mess up the cruise, the ship's systems. The other one is the data privacy of cruise ships passengers.
Yep.
With this electronic device that they walk around with, for a variety of reasons, for I don't know, which probably registers their eating habits, gambling habits, etc. And another thing, which is somehow also related, is the fact that what if someone takes over the control of the ship and uses it as a weapon, just like 9/11, instead of planes but ships, to attack, to terrorize a population, or to, I don't know, to divert it to some sort of a malicious activity or destination, which also brings to mind, what if let's say a narcotics group wants to change the manifest of the ship to hide narcotics crossing over or going through some transit port.
Yeah.
Too many questions, sorry.
Many questions there. Let's pick a couple of them and remind me if I miss some. Let's talk about what's up with narcotics. Narcotics are interesting. Probably the relevant case that I think the Antwerp port problem with narcotics, where I think they actually managed to identify some containers, but the bad guys go and they actually weld stuff to ships.
They're ahead of us also.
I mean, it's bonkers. I mean, it's a huge industry. Yes, there is a threat there. Privacy, yeah, they're big privacies. I've not looked into particularly the cruise liner medallion thing. My guess is they have to have privacy in mind. As long as you've got consent from people that are willingly wearing these, that's fine. And if you can get them to pay for the privilege of wearing them, that's even better, because you have got the consent. So I think consent is important. But of course, that's interesting data. And the supermarkets have done that to us all for a long time. So there is established good practice, I think, that is there. I think the other thing you mentioned, cruise is interesting, because for a big container ship, maybe 70% of your crew are contract. And what we found out at Maersk, I sent one of my team on a ship to count for a voyage, and they counted each crew member brought 5 different devices on board that we had never seen before, because they weren't Maersk staff. And how do you manage that? I think BIMCO have done some good work already with awareness, but it's a long process to go for. And we knew that the crew are contract crew, and they will know which shipping line offers the best connectivity on board. and they will prefer to work for that shipping line that offers the best connectivity on board. So if you want the good crew, you've got to offer good connectivity. So it's almost a double-edged sword. You have to provide this, but there are ways you can do it in a safe environment. But on the other hand, 3 months into the voyage, if it's a long stint like that, you have very little control. You know of what's happening on the ship. So you have to rely on them. But yeah, there needs to be training, and there is some training. I think I covered some of the questions. Did I miss one?
Not really. I mean, no, the other ones were pretty much done in terms of using a ship as a weapon to terrorize.
It's possible. Yeah, and you know, if you look at the example of the rudder thing, you know, that is true. That is documented in the public domain. It is true. You could do it. There are probably easier ways to terrorize a population, and unfortunately we've seen it in the past. But it does bring to mind that, you know, especially if you look at autonomous ships,
Indeed,
it's that vulnerability in autonomous ships, and maybe if it's a tanker, a liquid natural gas tanker, suddenly that becomes more important.
or abandoning ship in the middle of the ocean because it's carrying some sort of a hazardous material.
Yeah. So I think those areas will be explored. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for these questions. Ian, you are up next.
Thanks very much, and thank you for an outstanding presentation. I actually have a piece coming out with the Atlantic Council soon on this topic, and I promise you it's already written. So if it sounds like it echoes some of your points, it was written in advance.
Yeah.
I wanted to just ask, I actually am a lawyer by background, and one of the things that I've been looking at is being very clear on distinguishing between both interference versus harm. Because you can have all kinds of interference, but it doesn't actually produce anything that's truly harmful. And then IT versus OT, and whether we need to be more diligent in making the distinction between the attacks that are on information technology versus operational technology, and the back doors that can be built into each of those are quite different. And so, do we need to be careful about lumping them all into one form of harm?
Yeah.
And if I can ask in advance a secondary question as well, does all of this point to a need to improve our global training for seafarers to make sure that they are not only able to operate in the increasingly technologically advanced environment, but equally able to operate in a completely analog environment in the instance of some sort of attack? Because as you said, don't look at your dials. Well, frankly, some seafarers don't know how to operate without looking at their dials. So how do we balance that?
Yeah, so that's two great ones. Let's take the second one first. So the training, and absolutely yes. I know BIMCO has done, the Baltic International Maritime, whatever it is, has done a lot of good stuff with awareness. We actually, when I was at Maersk, we contributed to that. So to actually kick it off. But what we were looking for is, you know, some of the training for the captains, get this in the universities that are maritime universities, get this ethos that there's going to be some point where you should not trust your dials, and it relates to everything. Your electronic maps, your GPS, these are things that are fundamental, and some of these older skills have been eroded, I think. And I recall when I went to meet a captain on a Maersk special once, and it was the maiden voyage. He brought it from the shipyard, and he actually produced his sextant. And he said, Andy, last night I used my sextant because I had 6 systems all failed. And this was a brand new ship from the shipyard. And we still need these skills. And I think, you know, and we've seen that, you know, the Stella Imperov is an actual example. That's where it wasn't where it thought it was. Now, I know one bit of sea looks like the other, but there are things you can do. And maybe people have got too reliant on technology.
Well, just to jump on that, the Black Sea incident is equally extreme, where they all thought they were at an airport on land.
It's bonkers, isn't it? Yeah. But you know, it's eminently spoofable. IT versus OT, yeah, great point. This is the real problem now we're seeing with ransomware. We're seeing ransomware. We've got the fuel example in the US. We have Norsk Hydro a little earlier, which were attacks on IT that took out the OT. And what people will say is well, our OT is separated from the IT via an air gap. No, it's not. On the diagram you're showing me, it is. You go to a real ship that's been at sea for 9 months and has had an electrical engineer there for 9 months who's a bit bored, and tell me they haven't bridged that air gap. And it can be simple things. If from the slides you might have seen that I had a printer in there. There was a printer that bridged the two components. That's a very likely scenario because we only need one printer because it's cheaper. So let's connect it to both segments. No, that's ruined our security. And it's not malicious. It's not done maliciously. It's just done to make their life a bit easier. That I'll reroute something in the ship so I don't have to get out of the cabin at 3 o'clock in the morning when the alarm goes off. I'm an electrical engineer. I can do that. And nobody's going to notice. But these are the things that make the difference. So we have relied on these older style things because the OT hasn't need to be connected, but the IoT does that for you. So it does create that bridge between the two.
Thank you very much, Ian. Also, thank you for joining us today. Before I hand over to the last question, handing over to Christian, I just want to mention that one in our previous sessions, we were also focusing on OT. You can find it, of course, now on YouTube in our channel. So now handing over to Christian, up to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for a really, really interesting or perhaps frightening presentation, Andy. But nonetheless, my question relates to the regulation of the subject matter. So, of course, we have all this Lex Generalis treaty regulation, SOLAS, ISM code, etc., etc. But it seems like one observation I have made that the real push is now coming from the industry itself in terms of best management practices, guidelines, in order for the ship owning company to have something, what you can say, to hold on to in order to know what to do and to mitigate the risk. So my question is basically if this is also an observation you have done and seen, or whether you see this as an potential, what you could say, challenge, or if this is simply the way to go in order to deal with this subject.
It's very difficult, and there's not a perfect solution. I had some input into the IMO regulations because I was advising to Danish shipping at the time, and it's far from perfect, but it sets a signal. And some of the difficulties is you've got this complex concept of ownership. So you may be the ship operator, you may be the ship owner, you might not be the ship builder. So I put my aviation hat back on and said, well, if you've got a problem with if British Airways had a cyber problem with a Boeing plane, whose fault is that? Is it British Airways' problem? Well, they might have actually leased the plane from somebody else, and that's true in shipping. Or is it the shipbuilder's problem? Because some of these things are inherent to the build of it. And that's why it's so hard, because if you look at a ship that comes out of even the same shipyard, it's a bit different. Even the same type of ship, they're a bit different because, oh, there was a cheaper radar today, so we put a cheaper one in. And you get that sort of thing. And I think the key to it is in some of the component manufacturers, so the radar manufacturers. So I actually talked to some of them and said, well, tell me about the security in the radar that we've got. And I think, well, they said, nobody's even asked that question before. So of course we haven't thought about it. So that's why I think now, because you've got this pressure coming, maybe unfairly on the operators, but they're most empowered to ask these questions of the shipbuilders, the radar manufacturers, the ECDISC manufacturers. They're very well empowered in the best position. So it's messy and imperfect, but it seems to have some effect.
Thank you very much for this question, for all the questions, and especially for the great presentation, as Christian said, to some extent frightening presentation. I would like to thank you for joining us today. The next briefing will take place in early summer, and you will hear from us in due course. The next time we will also host an informal coffee break after the briefing, but today we will end at 5:05 sharp. I really appreciate that you were part of today's briefing, and I hope that many of you will join again. So I wish you a very nice evening. Take care and stay healthy. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.